Greetings, Adams. I, Tantus Narvan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on the Pathfinder role-playing game. Today I'm going to continue into the combat section. I'm going to talk about injury, death, and healing. So let's just dive right into it. Let's talk about what injury is. When you get an injury, you're losing your hit points. Your hit points are the amount of damage you can take, and it represents not only a combination of sort of physical ability to take damage, but also like mental acuity to push yourself forward when you've been injured, and the ability to turn serious injuries into less serious ones. You know, it's sort of like if someone's stabbing at you, it's like the ability to, rather than get stabbed deep in the chest, maybe only getting stabbed in your arm a little bit, that sort of thing. That's what your hit points represent. The ability to basically ignore critical wounds for a while, or to push through them, to mitigate them, that sort of thing. So there is an optional rule they mentioned here, which I like using. It's the massive damage rule. The massive damage rule says if you take half of your hit points in one attack, minimum 50 damage, you have to make a fort save DC 15 or die. So that means it really only applies once you have a lot of hit points. If your maximum hit points is less than 50, it's not going to matter, since it is minimum 50 damage that this massive damage rule applies. But it just says, like, if some kind of huge attack hits you and does half your hit points in one shot, you have to make a save because it's like a shock to your system, and or possibly die. So as I said, it's a fort save, DC 15, you roll it, you see if you die or live. So let's talk about what happens when you've lost a lot of your hit points. If you get to 0, you become disabled. What disabled means is you're now staggered. Now staggered is a condition that everybody can get. Staggered can occur other than just being disabled, but it usually is a result of some kind of spell or special attack. Now what staggered means is you can only take a move or a standard on your turn other than your free and swift actions. It basically restricts that you can only take one of two types of actions. You know, you can't do a full round action, you can't do a standard and a move, you have to do one or the other. Now, when you're disabled though, there's a caveat to this, in addition to the rules. So the first thing is, if you make any kind of move action, along with your free and swifts, everything is okay. You're fine, you can just make move actions, nothing affects you any differently. But if you make a standard, that's when things change. If you make a standard while you're disabled, at the end of your turn, you lose 1 health and start bleeding out. You basically go to negatives, which is going to bring us into talking about what happens when you go to negative hit points. So if you go to negative hit points for whatever reason, you are now dying. You lose 1 hit point a round. You're basically bleeding out slowly but steadily. Now you die once your total negatives becomes equal to your constitution score. Not your modifier, your score. So if you have a constitution score of 10, you can get to negative 10 before you die. Now you can also die if your constitution score is reduced to 0. This could be through ability drain or ability damage. You can have the ability scores affected by ability damage and drain to lower them. When constitution hits 0, you die. Now if you should die by any means, most likely you're not going to have to, you're going to be either making a new character, or sometimes if characters are powerful enough or have enough money, you can pay to get someone brought back to life. It can occur. So it's going to be up to you and your team how that's going to work. Resurrection, again, costs money, but it is an option. On the other hand, making a new character can also be an option. Character death does occur in games, though its use is going to be up to your game master. Some game masters like to try to keep a character death to a minimum. They might give you extra chances to live through things. On the other hand, some game masters are very brutal, and they just kill off characters left and right. It's entirely up to the style of your game master. Now, when you're at negatives, you're not out of the fight, so to say. You can actually try to stabilize yourself. Every turn, you get to roll a d20 and check if you stabilize. Stabilizing meaning you no longer are bleeding out. As long as you take no more damage, your hit points stay at whatever negative they're at. You roll a d20, and it's a constitution check, meaning you add or subtract your constitution modifier, and the DC is 10. Now that sounds easy, but it's not, because you get a penalty equivalent to the negative you are at. So let's explain that. If I'm at negative 6, I would subtract 6 to my roll to see what I would get to making my con check to stabilize. So that's basically what it means, is that the lower you are, the closer you are to whatever death you have, the harder it is for you to stabilize. So if you're only at negative 1, you're only getting a negative 1. If you're at negative 10, you're getting minus 10 to your roll. At that point in time, more than likely, you're going to have some kind of con modifier, which you're going to have to need. Now, a 20 always stabilizes you. As soon as you roll a 20, you're stabilized, you're fine, you're no longer bleeding out. Now, recovering from being down, you can either get someone's help, or you can try to do it on your own. Getting someone's help is the easiest way to recover once you're down. If someone's looking after you, every hour you can make a check. And it's the exact same check as you just made to stabilize. So it's assuming that you're no longer bleeding out, you're lying there, someone's looking after you, you get a check every hour, and if you make it, you become conscious. So that means you'd still be at negatives, but you'd at least be up and around. You are disabled then. So you're treated as if you were at 0 hit points, even though you're at negatives. At this point in time, you can go into natural or magical healing. I will explain those in a minute. Now, if you don't have anybody to look after you, it's a little harder. You're more than likely to die, because it is, again, the exact same check. But if you fail on your own, you lose a hit point and start dying again, and it returns to the normal cycle of having to stabilize from bleeding out, and then trying to, once again, so basically you have to make 2 stabilizations checks on an own if you're at negatives and no one is helping you. So that means if you're at only -1, and you have very high constitution, it might be easy for you to survive if no one comes for you to recover and get back up, and nothing tries to finish you off. On the other hand, if you're at -10, you're probably going to need someone's help to really stabilize and not die. Now let's move into healing. Let's talk about the basics of healing. You heal naturally with rest. Now you heal 1 hit point per level you have per 8 hours of rest you do. So if I rest for 8 hours and I'm level 3, I heal 3 hit points. If I rest during that same period of time, if I have ability damage, not drain, I will get into these a little better later on, but if you have ability damage, you heal the rate of 1 per 8 hours of rest. Now, for 24 hours of rest, you can double both of these. It basically means if you rest for an entire day, you can double these things. So it would imply that you're resting straight in a row. Usually this is assuming you can't do more than 2 periods of rest in a day, meaning you can't rest 8 hours 3 times. That would encounter that it would be 24 hours, full days of rest. Other than that, any kind of activity that would break this apart, and it's assuming you're going to have to do some kind of activity in between these that would break these apart, so that you couldn't get that sort of 8, 8, and 8 for resting, hence why that it's only double for an entire day. And this doubles both the normal rate, so it would be 2 hit points per level per 24 hours that you would heal, 2 points of ability damage that you'd heal per day of rest. Now you can also be magically healed. Both ability damage and normal damage can be healed magically by people casting spells on you, using special abilities, or even anything that heals you like that. This sort of cheats the system a little bit, because if you are at negatives and someone cures you, you basically like wake up right away. You're like, oh god, so if I would have my friend down here, he's at like -4, I use a spell to cure him of some of his damage, it brings him back above negatives to a positive number, he'd be up and at them. So it kind of skips ahead of like having to make checks to become conscious again. Magical healing sort of speeds things up a lot. Now you can never heal more hit points than you've lost, meaning you're always going to be losing hit points, and so you always have this total hit points that you have. You can never heal more than those total hit points. Now there are temporary hit points. Spells and effects can give temporary hit points. These are basically added on to your current hit point total, and when you take damage, they go away first. You can never heal temporary hit points. They're an extra add-on to your hit points that's, again, temporary. They usually go away in a certain period of time. Now, of course, your hit points can change. If something changes your constitution score, it will change your hit points, if your modifier changes. So if I'm at 10 or 11, my modifier is going to be 0. It's not going to matter if I take any damage. But if I go up to 12, my modifier goes to +1. I'm gaining an extra 1 hit point per level. It would apply right then and there. So changes to your constitution can change your total amount of hit points, and they will be added on. The thing is that when those changes go away, you do lose those hit points too. So if you, let's say you gained 10 hit points for a battle, at the end of the battle, you're going to lose those 10 hit points. You may have to worry about that dropping you to negatives. Sometimes if you gain a lot of hit points and you're really low, that also could kill you all of a sudden, the loss of a lot of hit points. It can happen to characters. Now, characters can also take non-lethal damage. Now, non-lethal damage, if something would deal it to you, you keep track of it. You basically keep adding the numbers up. When the total amount of non-lethal damage you've taken equals your current hit points, you are staggered then. You're treated sort of similar to you being disabled, except you don't bleed out if you do a standard action. You can act normal, you can do the normal staggered rules, a standard or a move. If your non-lethal damage exceeds your hit points, you're knocked unconscious. You're basically clubbed out. Now, you can keep taking non-lethal damage, but as soon as your non-lethal damage equals your total hit points, you start taking lethal damage after that. If I had 20 hit points total, and I took 21 non-lethal damage, it would knock me out, but I would have one of those damage would not be non-lethal, and it would be lethal damage it would start dealing me. And if someone kept clubbing me then, it would start doing more and more lethal damage. So if you've taken damage, you're easier to knock out, but you still have a buffer before you start taking more damage from non-lethal damage. Now, you can deal non-lethal damage with a lethal weapon. You can take -4 to do this. So if I'm attacking with a sword, which normally does lethal damage, I can choose to take -4 to my attack to do non-lethal damage. On the other hand, if I'm fighting with a weapon that does non-lethal damage, I can do the same, take -4 to deal lethal damage. So it means I'm making it harder to hit because I've got to hit like certain spots with this club, which would normally only do non-lethal damage. But I'm hitting you in a place that would cause it to do lethal damage. I'm taking that -4. Now you heal non-lethal damage at a rate of 1 per hour per level. So unlike lethal damage, which requires 8 hours, it's 1 per level per hour that you heal non-lethal. Now when magical healing applies to you, it not only does it heal the amount of lethal damage it says, but the same amount of lethal damage a magic spell is healing, you also heal in non-lethal damage. So it heals both lists of them. So if I've taken 10 damage and I have 10 non-lethal damage and someone heals me 8, I would heal up 8 hit points in the lethal damage and lose 8 for my non-lethal damage I'd taken. So that's it for today. I've gone on to the basics of hit points, the basics of damage, talked a little bit about character death, talked about recovering and non-lethal damage. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. It's a great way of showing support for the channel and the Empire. Please subscribe if you already have. We're always looking for more members, more citizens. And please share this video if you know anyone that could learn anything from this video or would just enjoy watching it. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.